This is the Italian Citizenship Podcast, hosted by Marco Permunian and Rafael Di Furia. Hello there, and welcome to another episode of the Italian Citizenship Podcast, presented by Italiancitizenship.com. Of course, we are back at it again with Italian attorney Marco Permunian, and I am Rafael Di Furia. And this week we are doing a part 2 follow-up to our first episode with frequently asked questions about getting Italian citizenship through a court case. So just to jump straight back into the topic, Marco, for those who will be pursuing Italian citizenship through the courts, how is the case carried out? Will they have to be there?
As I mentioned in the previous episode, cases are now filed electronically, which means that the attorney of record can file the case from distance without having to travel to the court. And also the attorney of record will be representing the plaintiff during the hearing, so there's no need for the plaintiff to travel to Italy to attend the hearing. By the way, lately courts have been also skipping hearings, which means that the actual hearing has been replaced by a further submission of a brief by the attorney, which means that the judge basically asks the attorney, instead of coming here and attend the hearing, just submit a brief where you further explain the case to me. And that is because the citizenship cases are simple cases, so to speak, meaning that compared to other kinds of cases, there's much less involved. There are no witnesses to be heard. There are no contracts to be evaluated. It's just a matter of submitting documents that show that the plaintiff is entitled to citizenship. And of course, the attorney of record will be notified in advance by the court regarding whether a hearing will be held. And a lot of our clients have been asking us, is it worthwhile for us to be present during the hearing? And while that is possible, it's generally speaking not advisable or worthwhile, rather because these hearings, when they're held, are very brief and they're more of a formality, meaning the judge is simply reviewing the claim with the attorney without even going through the documents. That is something that they do separately. So they just make sure that they understand the case and that they are ready to make a decision, but then they made their considerations and they made a decision after the hearing. And generally speaking, that phase takes 2 to 3 weeks. Of course, it doesn't take 2 to 3 weeks for a judge to make a decision. It takes probably a few hours, but they take normally an amount of time, which could be between 2 and 4 weeks to render a final decision. And the final decision, of course, will be officially communicated through the attorney of record, through the PEC system.
So Marco, this makes me very curious, especially you mentioned about the brief, and that you also mentioned that the court case is kind of a formality, that it's a very short proceeding. Is there any time, though, for the attorney to be able to make arguments during the hearing itself, or are those all submitted beforehand?
Generally speaking, judges, they don't want attorneys to make arguments verbally. They prefer that attorneys present thorough claims to explain the case in writing. So either through the initial petition or through these briefs that the attorney is asked to submit prior to the hearing. But like I mentioned, the hearing is more of a formality, and it's used more to verify the procedural aspects of the trial, like has the counterpart appeared? Did they submit an answer? Were they notified properly? And then maybe the judge spends a couple of minutes to ask the attorney about the petition itself. But again, since these kind of cases are very much based on documentary evidence, judges do not want attorneys to spend a lot of time explaining and arguing the cases. They prefer that that is done in writing through the initial petition or through the briefs that are submitted prior to the hearing.
And so then after the case has been heard and has been presented in court, how will the petitioner find out about updates from that point forward? I mean, will they get emails? Is there a platform that they can go and check? What is the normal way of being able to keep up with someone's case?
The petitioner is not going to be contacted directly by the court. Rather, the court will officially notify the attorney of record of each step of the case, like when a judge is assigned to the case, when a case number is assigned to the case itself, when the hearing is set, when a decision is filed by the judge. So the attorney of record is notified officially through the PEC system of each of these steps, and then it's the attorney of record that needs to inform the petitioner of each of these notifications. And when I say PEC, of course, I'm referring to the electronic certified email, which is something that we have discussed in previous episodes. It's a system that exists in Italy through which you can notify another party officially through a certified email. It's basically the equivalent of sending a registered mail. But of course, as we briefly mentioned before, there's also a way for the petitioner to somehow track the case through this application, which is called Giustizia Civile, that you can access from your cell phone after you download it. And you can check the progress of your case by entering the case number that, of course, needs to be given to you by your attorney.
And when we're talking about these different processes that happen, these different stages, how long should a person expect for each one of these to be able to take?
Of course, every court is different and every judge is different. So we can give an estimation, or rather describe a standard case. And in a standard situation, you can expect, for instance, for a judge to be assigned to the case after the case has been filed within 2 to 6 weeks, at which point the judge assigned to the case will set the hearing. And the hearing is normally set for roughly, say, between 6 and 12 months after. And after a judge has been assigned to the case, you can expect the judge to set the hearing date. And the hearing date normally is set for, on average, 9 months after the filing of the case. Of course, like I just mentioned, we're trying to describe a standard case. These timelines could vary depending on the judge, depending on the court, depending on the time period. And generally speaking, a decision is issued between 2 and 6 weeks after the hearing. And then after a decision is rendered, you have to wait another 60 days for the decision to become final, at which point you can go ahead and register with the AIRE and obtain your Italian passport.
And Marco, for those who might be a part of a large family who would be interested in pursuing citizenship through the court, is there any type of limitation on the number of petitioners that can be heard on the same case?
Anybody who shares the same ancestor can be on the same case, and it's actually very much advisable that large families file one single case, because it's easier from a procedural standpoint, of course, to follow the course of one case rather than different cases. For clarity, of course, I think it's worthwhile mentioning that as of January the 1st, the filing fee system was updated by the Italian government, and now every petitioner who is on the case needs to pay a 600 euros filing fee, even if one single case is being presented, as opposed to what happened prior to January the 1st. But with that being said, it's still advisable to file one single case because it will allow any way to save money. For instance, the common documents are presented one time, and it's not necessary to duplicate the documents for several cases. You can also share, if you're a large group, the attorney fees, and therefore it's still convenient, even from a financial standpoint, to file one single case rather than separate cases. But with that said, it's worthwhile mentioning that some courts have been putting limits lately on the number of applicants that can be on a single case, and the vast majority of the Italian courts throughout the country has still not yet imposed any limits. There are a couple of isolated situations where the number of applicants cannot be more than, for instance, 10. And if they're more than 10, you need to file separate cases.
So Marco, just one final question for this episode. For those maybe who've been having a difficult time of being able to get an appointment at the consulate, but they were able to pursue a case in court in Italy. When all is said and done with this court case, will the court actually be pushing the consulate to give them an appointment, or how does this all work for somebody who maybe is trying to figure out what are the next steps if they are unable to pursue citizenship through the consulate because they simply weren't able to get an appointment?
In Italy, the right to become an Italian citizen is labeled as a personal right, which legally speaking has a very specific definition, which means that the court in every case is allowed to render a decision as to whether the person is a citizen or not, regardless of how and why the court process was initiated. So regardless of whether the person was unable to get an appointment with the consulate or they were rejected by the consulate and they now are petitioning the court to rectify the situation, or if they have, for example, a 1948 case, in any situation in which the plaintiff is requesting the court to become an Italian citizen, the court has the power to decide directly on that specific issue and to grant citizenship directly without having to go through the consulate. So even if, for instance, you are petitioning the court because of the lack of appointments, so you're telling the court, I wanted to become an Italian citizen, I wanted to submit my application, but I was never able to get an appointment at the consulate. I tried maybe for 2 years, and now my last resort is to petition the court. It's not that the court will say, okay, now I'm forcing the consulate to give you an appointment, or I'm forcing the consulate to give you the right to apply for citizenship. The court itself will establish whether the person is a citizen or not, and therefore there's no need to go through the consulate after the court process is over.
Well, Marco, thank you so much for getting into this topic again for this part 2 episode of the discussion on getting citizenship, Italian citizenship, through a court case. Of course, for those who are needing any help to get Italian citizenship, how can they get in contact with you and your team?
People can contact us through our website, italiancitizenshipassistance.com.
Absolutely fantastic. And of course, for those who may be interested in more information like this, be sure that you are subscribed to this YouTube channel, as well as the audio-only podcast. But of course, if you're subscribed to the YouTube channel, that does mean you're automatically also subscribed to the Italian Real Estate Podcast and Ask the Italian Lawyer for more about making your life in Italy. And if you're interested in more about life abroad and living abroad from the perspective of a dual citizen expat, be sure to come over to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Rafael Di Furia, or you can search for Not Your Average Globetrotter. But of course, again, we have been here with Italian attorney Marco Permunian, and I am Rafael Di Furia. Stay safe and healthy out there, and we will see you all next time. Thank you.
Thank you.